Our next speaker this afternoon is Gretchen Crank. Gretchen is president of Historic Florissant and has been since 2007, so a very committed leader in her community. Through the years, Gretchen has served on several committees and commissions for the city of Florissant, including 16 years on Florissant's Old Town Commission and 7 years on the Landmark Historic District Commission. She's also been a member of St. Louis County's Historic Building Commission since 2006. In 1990, she wrote the book Reflections of the Florissant Valley, which was a collection of over 500 photographs from the Hazelwood, Spanish Lake, Blackjack, and Florissant areas. Later, she worked with Louis Pondron to compile and edit his research on St. Louis County. That book, entitled Historical Records of St. Ferdinand, Florissant, and St. Charles, was published in 1992. In 2004, as part of Florissant's Lewis and Clark celebration, Gretchen was selected to head an archaeological dig committee to find the exact location of the First Parish Church and Presbytery. It was believed to be located in the city's Spanish land grant park in the heart of their historic district. Gretchen's committee of volunteers was led by Joe Harrell of the Archaeological Research Center of St. Louis, plus many members of the Mound City Archaeological Society. That project lasted 3 years, ending in the fall of 2006. A member of Historic Florissant since 1993, again, Gretchen has served as their president since January of 2007. Historic Florissant contains the largest archive in Florissant and North St. Louis County, and is open 6 days a week. And she told me before she started that if you want it open other days or hours, please just call her and she'll set up an appointment for you. Please help me welcome Gretchen Crank, who will present Historic Florissant, Saving Florissant's History One Brick at a Time.
I want to thank Bonnie and your whole organization for inviting me to come down from Florissant to talk to you today. I think this is a wonderful gathering that you do. If you do this every year, I think it gets everybody pumped up and gets you into the holidays and think about what you have here, not what you don't have here. So I really did enjoy Bob's talk about what you've gone through here for the last 50 years, and so much of it is so similar to what we do. And I think that maybe we need to talk more about our French connection and see if we can't help each other out a little bit, or at least cry on each other's shoulders when things are. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Historic Florissant Incorporated and why Florissant has so many little organizations like this. First of all, yes, I've been president since 2007, but the woman who organized Historic Florissant and was on the founding boards of all these others was Rosemary Davison. So let me see if I can make this work. Oh, I did, so you know. Okay. When I started putting my slides together, I said, I should just put that picture up there and then go sit down. Because this woman right there, I really hate to think what Florissant would be had she not come along when she did and motivate people and just get in there and do things. She turned 95 this summer, up until about a year ago when they took her car from her, and it really, hurt her feelings above everything else. She was coming in at least 5 days a week, up to the second floor, keeping us all in line and telling us what to do. Yes, she pretty much appointed me as her president to be, but I'm still learning from her every day. That's all I'm going to say about me. But about Rosemary, I told you she was 95, and she moved to Florissant in 1958. She was the first woman lawyer in Rawls County, Missouri. Although she never practiced law, she knows law. And when she moved to Florissant, one of the first things, because she reads newspapers one after the other until she's read them all, she used to say, but the little local newspaper in Florissant was the Florissant Valley Reporter, and the editor of that paper said is anyone interested in having a historical society. This town is pretty old, and we need to try to protect it a little bit. So they planned a meeting to see who would show up. 15 people showed up. But they did set it up that night for a not-for-profit organization, and 4 of those people were made officers, and they decided they would like to have a little museum, which they did. They had it in an old, I think it was in the old school that wasn't being used at that time. And that was the beginning. That was the Historical Society and remains our Historical Society today. That's not Historic Florissant. That same year, I guess I'm going to shoot. I'm going to forget to do this. Did I go chew?
Yeah.
Okay, what was the other one that I skipped? There was a bunch of ladies standing on the stairs. Maybe I can't. Okay, these are the women who became Historic Florissant. When Historic Florissant came along, we already had a historical society. We already had an organization called Friends of St. Ferdinand to protect the old brick church built in 1821. We had another organization that maintained and protected the Coldwater School with a little one-room schoolhouse. This organization was just these 5 women, and their bylaws were set up so that they could move very quickly if need be. If there was property that was in danger of being torn down, which was their primary goal in those days, they could act on that quickly and see what they could do to prevent that. This next picture, should I do this? Oh my gosh. No, I can't do that, I guess. Can you go back one? I'm sorry. This is a map of the historic district in Florissant. If you look at a St. Louis County map and look at the area of Florissant, you will see a little square place on the map that is our Old Town area. It was set up that way by the French back in the late 1700s. I don't know the exact date of the founding of Florissant. Nobody really does. But the French came here, and this part of town, they this is where they lived. They set up their little gardens and homes in these little square blocks. Then they farmed the common fields that went from Coldwater Creek to the Missouri River. And so you see that on the maps even today. You can see where the fields went, you know, underneath the subdivisions and that sort of thing out that way. This is the area that is protected by the Landmark Commission and the Old Town Commission in years past. Down, I guess you can't really see it on there, down near the creek, at the kind of at the bottom of the hill, is where Sacred Heart Shrine is. And you may have heard of that. You may have even been to Florissant. Back in the early days, Florissant was primarily French and Catholic, and still today, a majority of the people there are Catholic. And this church was built in 1821, and the parish had just outgrown it. They built a new church, excuse me, about a mile away, and the archdiocese thought it would be best to tear down their old church rather than to let it be used for something inappropriate, like a grocery store or something like that. You know, these little people that boutique type things, and so they wanted to tear it down. They did talk over the whole prospect of different things that they could do to say that an organization was formed called the Friends of St. Ferdinand. It's a non-denominational group of people who wanted to use it as a museum to one of the early museums, so people could learn what Florissant was like in the early 1800s. There was deed restriction put on there by the Archdiocese that it would no longer be used for church services or weddings. And it is still going, but that organization that was formed to protect that can only do that. That's, you know, it takes everything they have to keep, you know, to do their fundraisers and keep it in good repair. And so that was part of the reason that they decided they needed this organization of historic Florissant. The next one, I'm going to try to do this again. There was, okay, this is St. Ferdinand Shrine, and it's at the bottom of our historic district. There are 4 buildings. There's the convent, built in 1819, then the church, then the rectory, which was built to match the convent, but wasn't built till the 1840s, and then the school building. This again. Here we go. This is Tai de Noyer, which was originally owned by John Melanthi. At that time, it was just a real small house that had been a hunting lodge, and he had some improvements made on it and gave it to his daughter and her husband, Charles Chambers, for a wedding present. And over the years, it stayed in the Chambers family, and it's now a 21-room house. And that is the home base for the Historical Society. They did make a Historical Society that night with the newspaper editor, and that now is called Florissant Valley Historical Society. But again, all they have the time and the money to do is to protect this building. Rosemary was a founding member of all of those groups, but thought that you know, there were other buildings that were needing protection, and I don't know, you know, how the 50s and the 60s were down here, but there were a lot of buildings that were lost just because nobody knew what to do, or really they maybe realized that it was an old building and it would be nice to have it, but you know, this is progress and we need to move on. When I think it was Joe Deloge called the Historical Society people and asked them if they could help with Coldwater School. It's a little school actually in the Hazelwood School District, and because it was about to be torn down and it needed a lot of repair, and the people at the Historical Society said no, they couldn't do it. They just didn't want to take it on. And so even though Rosemary really didn't care for the idea of having a little not-for-profit group for every building that we had, one more time, and that's where the Historic Florissant came along. And actually then after that, in helping with the Coldwater School, they took it on themselves. Then after it was settled and it became, they called that the Heritage Foundation out there for a while, but now it is, it's taken care of now by the Hazelwood School District. So, let's see, do I have a picture? I may have a picture of that little building. Okay, well, there, thank you. That's a little building. This was a picture that we took just a couple of years ago. It was on our house tour in the fall, that Hazelwood School District is using that as a museum, and they've got a lot of things that have been donated by people that lived in the area a long time ago, and they have pretty changed in a little coat room in there, and they have the desks and the old stove inside. The first 2 buildings that the that Historic Florissant Incorporated, I'm going to do this really, there we go, was these 2, first 2 that I'm going to show you. This was already in progress when Historic Florissant came along in 1969. This shows, this building here is the trolley depot for an electric line that connected Florissant with St. Louis. The original track there is a 3-foot wide narrow gauge track for a train that was set up to run between St. Louis and Florissant in 1878. That was completed. The train only ran for about 12 years. They shut it down, they redid it for an electric line, but that little depot building stayed on. The trolley quit running in 1930. Somebody bought the depot and, some more time, and added onto it, it was a little confectionery. You can see down at this end, this isn't a very good picture, but it shows the trolley at the far left. There's living quarters were added to the back. There was a little hot dog stand. This was between about 1950 and 1965. And that was called Berkey's, and everybody knew where Berkey's was. And finally, I think they closed up just before they decided to widen St. Ferdinand Street, which was the main street. Actually, it was Hanley Road and Graham Road. And when they went to widen the street, they were going to have to tear down all of this, including the depot. And since this was a few years before Historic Florissant came along, Rosemary bought the depot and had it moved, and we've got a couple pictures of that, moved just a couple of blocks away until they could decide what to do with it. And it sat along the creek. It just really was getting in pretty bad shape. All the neighbors around there were, writing the newspapers and saying, this woman's lost her mind, she needs to go. She thought that it could be restored. What have I done here? Oh, okay, well,
here we go.
Well, this is after it was moved a second time to a little city park. The mayor agreed to make room there, and they moved it up actually another 10 blocks. Started finding volunteers to help restore it. It's basically just a little wooden box, and the JCs pitched in and helped do it, and people donated money, and finally it was completed, and the Chamber of Commerce moved in, and I got a finished picture. Oh my goodness, why can't I do that? Yes, painted red, or the original color, according to the old records, was kind of an ugly mustard color, but that's the only thing that Rosemary just really didn't want to follow the rules on with the color. And so it is red, it was red. Chamber of Commerce paid Historic Florissant, I don't know, I think they paid like $100 a month to use it, and until they built their own bigger building. Now, since then, we have sold it back to the city, I think about 2005, for $1, is what Rosemary had paid for it. And now there is a small restaurant in there, which again is an unusual situation. Every piece of property that Historic Florissant saved, it was something new and unique. It wasn't the same way twice. This one, it involved the JCs, it involved the city allowing private individual to move something into a city park, and now we have a little restaurant in the city park. I mean, it just wasn't done ever before, but still we have it, and a lot of people have gotten to enjoy it. The other piece of property that we were working on at that same time, well, I want to say we because I was, now I remember, but this was in 1969. Again, this couple is August and Amanda Archambault, and their house that they're credited for building was built in 1850, right up by Sacred Heart Church. And through the years, there were no updates made to this house, and there was a woman who lived there by herself. She got very old, and then they finally realized, I don't know how this could possibly be, there was only one electric line run into that house. She had a light bulb in the kitchen. There was no plumbing. She was using this outhouse. There was no furnace. She had a stove in the kitchen and a fireplace in the bedroom. The city, after the lady died, the city took possession of the house and the property. What was nice about this piece of property was that it, this is its before picture. You can see some of the windows are broken out. It really doesn't change too much when you see the after picture, but so much of the improvements were made on the inside. And the important thing about this piece of property was its outbuildings. Try to do. Here we go. This is from the back. The little light colored building is the summer kitchen, which is right behind the house. And there is a well house, and there's a privy and a smokehouse, and another little building that had a surrey in it.
Tell us again what year the house?
This house was built in 1850, and the Archambaults lived there. They actually only lived there about 10 years, but the house is named for him on the National Register because he was the one who had it built there. So we kept this building after it was restored. We kept it for several years, and we would have a caretaker who lived there, and in exchange for free rent, he was to do normal maintenance for us, and then allow us to have it on the house tour in the fall every year. And that worked out well for quite a few years, until finally Rosemary moved in there. Her husband had passed away. Her father, who had lived with her, had passed away. So she was on her own. So she moved into this house, and it was just beautiful on the inside. Of course, it was always on our house tour. This is another shot of the back of the house and the summer kitchen. And it's still owned by, well, if you've been to Florissant, you may know where Hendel's restaurant is, right there at that intersection where the Catholic Church and then Hendel's, and then this is right across the street. And the owners of Hendel's also own this piece of property and just decorate it beautifully, and so they, are always very willing to have this on our house tour in the fall. And so this was good for Historic Florissant in that no federal money was used for this. There was a matching grant that was offered, but then it was paid back, and we had bought it from the city and for $40,000, and through all the dinners that we had, and the wine and cheese, and the craft show after craft show, made enough money to pay that piece of property up. And this is the front. Again, it doesn't look a whole lot different. It is a beautiful house, and so and it's often on tour, and because it still has those outbuildings, they're very willing to let school children come through there on tours, and the scouts and that sort of thing, to tell the kids what all these buildings were used for, that they're just something that they might not ever be exposed to in any other way. So those two pieces of property were the first ones that Historic Florissant took on, and were able to restore it. Rosemary seemed to always have a way of influencing people and making them want to help her. She could get a fantastic loan from the bank with almost no interest on it, and kind of a pay up when you can Rosemary sort of way. The next building that we were involved with was, I guess it started in '72 and ran on until about '74. And you may remember this if you were even as much as 10 years old. You probably had heard something about this. This sat at the north end of what would be the inner belt. The inner belt wanted to come into Florissant and hook up with 270, and this fantastically grand cloverleaf, which was going to take this house and the barn and everything, with it. And it was, you know, really my first experience firsthand with people saying somebody ought to do something. And I know you heard it a million times. I heard Bob say it over and over. People will write a letter and they'll say, this is such a shame, you can't tear that down, somebody has to do something, and then walk away. So along with many other groups, Historic Florissant was involved with persuading the Highway Department, Florissant's landmark commissions to find a different way for that highway. And there was one man from the Highway Department, and said this, was quoted in the paper as saying that all the lives that are going to be lost because we had to change the configuration of that clover leaf will all be in the heads of the preservationists. So, you know, as far as I know, there's never been an accident there. They've changed that interchange 2 or 3 times since then, but so far,
I think Bob Hunter, the chief engineer of the State Highway Department.
Who's that?
Bob Hunter.
Yeah.
He made that statement.
Oh, did he? Well, I just remember the name Wayne Kennedy, and I don't know where he's sitting as a picture. But anyway, that was, after the dust settled on that, it was owned by Historic Florissant, and then we really knew we were in over our heads with this, but it was completely restored on the inside. There's beautiful frescoes and surprise fireplaces and a dumbwaiter, and besides there being a ghost in the basement, which I didn't know that for many years, and they tell me now that it's just hideously haunted. We sold it to a private individual. She got little craft shops and antique shops, and there's in the barn there is a deli, a little restaurant in there, and so that has worked out. That's worked out wonderful for them. Pardon me?
When was that built?
That was built right after the Civil War. John B. Myers had a lot of money. I can't remember where he was from. You don't remember where he was from, do you? I know some he's my husband, and he knows this stuff better than me sometimes. He married a woman from Florissant, and she wanted to be close to her family, so they designed this, and there were very elaborate plans down to the color paint that they would use, and they had just gotten started, I think in '67, and he died. And so they didn't know what to do there for a while. It just sat vacant and not, no more building until they finally just decided they had all the plans. It's what he had wanted. She had a son that helped her finish this up, and it was built according to the plans. When it came to Historic Florissant then, 100 years later, all of those detailed plans were part of the probate or something, you know, from 100 years ago, so they knew exactly how it should look. Clear up to the widow's walk up there on the top. This is an old picture. It's the only old picture of it that we have in our archives. And we think it was taken about 1880. And you can see that there's people looking out of all the windows. And it was kind of that southern plantation looking style. This is Mrs. Meyer and her son, John B. Meyer Jr., outside at the front. And she lived out her days there. She stayed there. And I don't really know the chain of ownership after that until, well, I guess in the 1960s it was getting broken into once in a while. There was a lady that owned it and but didn't live there, so there was, you know, it needed some saving anyway, even without the highway department. This is a picture from across, you can see where 270 would one day be. This picture actually was from about 1940, in the 30s somewhere, and it was a big wide photograph that showed the person who took the picture was actually interested in the land near the camera. was going to build a big house there, and took this picture just for that reason, to decide what he wanted to do. And you can see the barn over there at the far right, and it's still standing. And actually, the sad thing is right now it's for sale again. So we've all got our fingers crossed that even though it's on the National Register, you know, sometimes that's just not enough. So we hope that if it sells to somebody who appreciates all the little details there are in the house. This is a picture after it was restored. That fence, there were remnants of an old fence there, and some of the volunteers made those pickets and painted them and put the fence back up across the front. This picture is of Joseph Peters. He lived in St. Louis before coming to Florissant, and was owner of Peters Furniture Company, and it was quite a good-sized business down in the city. Being tired of the dirtiness of the big city in those days, which would have been, well, let's say 1870 to 1900, he bought property in Florissant, built a house for himself, but built several other houses that he rented out. In addition to the furniture factory in Florissant, he was president of Citizens Bank for a time, and he was mayor for a couple of years in there too. This house here is a house that was across the street from where he lived, and it was built as rental property, and it had been a really pretty little house. This picture was taken about 1970, I think. It had been divided into two apartments, one on the first floor, one in the attic, or in the second floor, I mean. It was going to be torn down because our bank was expanding and wanted that lot for a parking lot. Since that was the last one of the Peters buildings, we really wanted to see it saved. This is a shot from the back, and that stairway was added when they made it into two apartments, and so that was their only way to get up to their second floor without going through the apartment below. So again, Historic Florissant got involved. It's kind of hard to see this is the back door, and you can see that they're putting a new wood roof on and taking those old shingles off, and underneath there was the wood siding, which mostly just needed to be cleaned and repainted. There was a few boards that had to be redone. This is an interior shot of the bathroom on the second floor and an old tub, and the only reason I included it was because going through my house tour pictures, I have a picture of that very bathroom on the house tour. So it did clean up nicely, and there was a couple that was helping us with the restoration at the time. They fell in love with the house and bought it from Historic Florissant just really about the time we finished up our restoration, and that was in 1976, 77, note up there, and they live there. Yeah, they raised all the children there, and have been on our tours. We have a house tour every fall on the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So, and it sits really just kind of on like an island of parking lots for the bank, which certainly doesn't need another parking lot. And it's right across the street from our city hall. So I do have an after picture here, I think. I think this was just taken last year because at our house tour time, because it has a garland on their porch. But it's painted so beautifully, like a lot of the Victorian with three colors. We like to have three colors on our big Queen Anne Victorian houses. This was This was an older picture. This was shortly after it was finished the first time. And the man who lives there is a horticulturist and has worked for the botanical gardens, and he works at the butterfly house now. And so the yard is just beautiful, all the plants and things that he has there. This little house is in one of Florissant's parks, down at St. Ferdinand Park. It's mostly a park of ball diamonds. There's a little lake down there and you can feed the ducks. This house was built by Henry Bockrath in 1876. He also didn't live here very long, but he was a builder. He built this for his family, and he also built the building in town that is Hindle's Market and Hindle's Market Cafe now. He moved after about 10 years, moved to Jefferson City, but the Weezy family moved in, and this was part of their farm then. And you know, it was falling in disrepair with the last owner. When she died, I think it was, you know, it's one of those ownership things where, you know, I'll buy it for $1 and sell it to you for 10. And but it finally came to the end that it belonged. It was owned by the city, but it was leased to Historic Florissant. The city put certain amount of money, I think $20,000 at that time, it was enough to do a restoration. And for 20 years, Historic Florissant was in charge of the maintenance of all of everything that needed to be done at the property. This was a little room that had been tacked onto the back, and that they took that off and make the house look better. This was about partway through the restoration. The dormers are installed there, but you can tell it's still not quite done, and this was their finished product. And it's a really pretty little house. When we were responsible for the house in those 20 years, we had a caretaker in there. Again, he was really, I think, a builder by trade, and so he did a lot of the work himself and lived there without paying rent, and then agreed to have it on our house tour every year. Is my time up? Well, let me hustle real quick here. I'll go through the rest of these very quickly. This was a building on St. Francis, which is our main street. It was called the Delisle Building because it was part of a little park back in the 1870s. When they widened the street in front, well, this is a picture of it from the back. There had been a murder there, and it's another one of those things that's so haunted that nobody wants to live on the second floor anymore. But it was Ralph's Cafe. A lot of these little details I didn't know until just this last week when we were going through the old records, because all of this happened before I was part of Historic Florissant. But Ralph's Cafe in 1970s went out of business, and they gave the building to the city of Florissant, who did not really want it because they didn't want to have to be responsible for the upkeep. And again, Historic Florissant was involved, but it's privately owned now. This little house is a cute little French-looking house. This picture was taken during the Depression. Again, the city bought this block where this was the only house in their way, and we're getting ready to push it over. Second picture of it, this from the side. It's a little bigger than it looks from the front. There was a stairway on the outside, which was the only way to get to the loft on the second floor, which just made it kind of interesting that people still lived like that in the 30s. When they started to tear it down, they found that there had been a log cabin on the inside. So this really doesn't make much sense, so I'll go through it kind of quickly. They decided, since the logs were there, that they would rebuild this as an American log cabin, just so the school kids could come and see what an American cabin looked like. Oops. Well, anyway, they, can you go back one more? Right there. That's the finished product. It has this magnificent brick chimney, which is, everybody will tell me, and they do all the time, that that's not the chimney that would belong in a little cabin like that, but it is holding it up. Those logs on that side were weak and the wall was about to go. The bricklayers offered to do this, and so we were foolish not to accept. So that's why, and it's still there, but there was never really a log cabin there. This is the Gettemeyer house. This is our house where we have our archive and our offices, and we have the whole second floor. We rented a portion of the first floor to an architect who pays us rent, and we pay our bills. This picture was from about the 1880s, and the Gettemeyer family lived there until 1939. It was bought by the Pondram family, and then it was sold to Shell Oil. This is a picture from 1958, and Mrs. Pondram out there in the yard. They were going to tear it down. Again, here's all boarded up and ready to shove over, and again, somebody needs to do something. And even though it was 1991, Rosemary was 70 years old by that time. It was up to her to keep that from happening. There's the other side of it. An agreement was made between Historic Florissant, the city of Florissant, and Shell Oil to give us the house and enough land that we could put in a little parking lot, put up a fence between us and the gas station on the corner. We had 1 year to restore it. It had to be done, which we met that obligation. This is the other side of it now. We've kind of flipped it. This was the back door. Now it's the front door, and we have a Dunn Road address now. This was another house that was going to be torn down because the bank wanted to expand and put their drive-through windows there. It was such a plain, kind of ugly little house, but it was built in the 1870s by Henry Albers, who was one of our merchants there in town for many years, and there's still Albers family around, and they're related to every other German family there, including the Hindels. This is what it looked like from the back. Historic Florissant bought it, well, this was after it was restored by some people put a tea room in there, bought it from us. And the thing that is odd about this house is that from the second floor, everything is symmetrical. There are 3 windows. The porch is not under that center window. The door is not even centered under the porch. It's just, it's kind of hard to do that. So, but it is saved, and now the tea room is closed, and there's a lawyer in there now. Oh, there's another picture of it after it was done. This was the last piece of property that we took on to do this. It was in 1999. This is a tiny, tiny little house. Rosemary said we spent more money restoring this little bitty house than any of those other houses. It is, well, it's kind of this Snuffy Smith kind of house. Everything's crooked, and it looks like it could just be blown over. It was right there on Main Street. Rosemary said when she was there with the workers while they were working, a man pulled up to her and rolled down his car window and said, "Rosemary, this is the dumbest thing you have ever done." So that just kind of gave her the, they picked the little house up and scooted it to the back of the lot, and then built a foundation for it. And again, this wasn't cheap to do. So this is another picture of it when they're moving it back up where it belongs. And there's the finished product. And our lady bought it from us and has a little stencil shop in there right now. So we no longer do that. I don't think we have the money to do that anymore in these days when everything costs so much. We do tours. We have created a couple of paths through town. One is called the Green Line Tour, where we picked houses in the historic district and put them on a map, and then there's a green line painted through town. You wind through and you have a brochure to follow and see what historic Florissant's all about. We have houses from the 1950s, which are starting to look old to us now, all the way back to 1790s. We do have one vertical log house that's unfortunately covered with aluminum siding, but we're thinking that the current owner may remedy that. So that's about our oldest house. And we've got things in between, and it's just, this part of Florissant is an interesting, fun place to be. And our office is open. We're there 10 to 4, Monday through Friday, 1 to 4 on Saturday. We have an enormous archive there now of family histories and all the different communities around the St. Louis area. We can do work for you, or we can let you come in and we'll pull what we have so you can sit there and read and work in our place. So anyway, that's historic
Questions, okay?
About a mile north of your historic district is the precious Delos Mansion, and very familiar with it. Get there often. Boeing has a education center there. But reading on some history of the area, they talked about the Coldwater Creek being the real reason everything happened early there, and I tried to get dates. You know, in other words, the fur trapping. And then I heard you had one vertical log. If you can give me the dates of that early period of fur trapping.
Well, we think that house maybe dates to 1790. I don't know that for sure, but we do know it's vertical log. We can see that from the basement. Coldwater Creek back in the late 1700s was more like a river. You could run a canoe up and down there, and that was really what drew the people to that area, especially the French, because so many of their farms were these long, narrow fields where they wanted two water sources. They had the Missouri River and Coldwater Creek. They had a neighbor not too far from them on either side if they were attacked by an Indian or a bear or whatever. Then they lived in town. So I don't know that there were people living there much before 1770 or so. The Spanish land grant, we can date it by that, in 1789, Florissant was granted different grants of land by the Spanish. The lot where we did the archaeological dig was where there was to be a parish church, a presbytery, and then the cemetery. And the top half of the block, and then the bottom half of the block was for military parade grounds, you know. Francois Dunnigan, who was there as our commandant, was a Frenchman appointed by the Spanish in those days. So, I don't know, we kind of have a little friendly banter with the people in St. Charles as to who was there first, and maybe they got us by a few years, 1770s. Okay, well, thank you.
Hi, thank you for watching Channel 798.
Thank you for watching Channel 7 and 98.
Hi, thank you very much for watching Channel 798.